Hello and welcome to another episode of the Best You interview series. It's Gary here again. Thank you very much, as always, for taking the time to tune in to this episode. And today I'm delighted to be joined by certified executive coach, professional speaker, strategic advocate, and the founder of Repowered Leadership, Megan Gill, who is here to discuss her thoughts and experiences on the power of influence for women in the workplace. Megan has worked for almost 2 decades in the energy industry, providing her with an ideal vantage point to know what it's like to lead from the middle of it all. Megan has seen and experienced firsthand that many women are leading but not always being seen or supported for everything that they bring to the table, and that was the inspiration to create Repowered Leadership, to support high-performing women who are doing the real work, carrying the real responsibility, and are ready to grow their careers without burning out, without stalling out, or waiting for permission. Megan does this by working with women in mid to senior roles who are navigating the messy middle of leadership, where often credibility has to be earned twice over. Through one-on-one coaching, workshops, and her What, which is Women Advancing and Thriving Together community, Megan helps women communicate with confidence, manage complexity, build influence, and lead on their own terms. I love that. Megan has been recognised by the Young Women in Energy Awards and Women of Renewable Energy Awards, and she brings the same level of intention, commitment, and challenge to the leaders that she supports. Megan, thank you very, very much for joining me today.
For having me here. I'm excited to be on.
I'm absolutely delighted to have you here. This has been quite some time in the making. We've been following each other for quite some time and having the odd chat on social media here. So it's great to get the opportunity to chat to you live in person. So let's start with the journey thus far. I've provided a little bit of an overview in terms of your bio as to what your journey looked like. But what brought you to take the leap? Was there a specific circumstance, event, happening, experience that you had that took you to the point where you took the leap to create Repowered Leadership?
Yeah, and it really is through my journey and spending my career in the energy sector. Like you said, it's been almost 20 years now that I've been working in the power sector here in Alberta. And as you know, it's an industry that it actually lags behind almost all other industries in terms of women's representation. So a very male-dominated space, and some really unique challenges for everyone in the workforce, but then specifically for women. And I've kind of experienced that, faced that firsthand as I've kind of climbed through the ranks in the sector. And one specific time really was the beginning. There's a couple kind of points along the way, I think, that ignited Repowered Leadership, but it was earlier in my career. I was a newish leader, and I had just taken on a new role at a new organization. Taking this role, feeling really confident going in, like I've got this, and then within a couple of weeks, it was very clear I did not have this. I was not feeling equipped to really thrive in that role and to navigate some of the challenges that I was facing. So some of those challenges were, it was a new role, like it hadn't been felt before it was created. I came and stepped into it. So some unclear expectations
Right.
from the start, and then a lot of expectations, different expectations from my leaders, different expectations from my team. And then some really interesting team dynamics because there was so much change happening in the organization, not everybody happy with the direction that it's going, right? So some of those things from the start. And then there was just a ton of work, not a lot of resources. So this is another similar situation that a lot of leaders find themselves in this sector as the complexity increases and the pace of change is picking up. And so it was a lot of pressure from all sides, and definitely from outside, but also just that internal pressure and that feeling like I had to prove myself, like I was the right person for this role.
Yeah.
And it was me taking work home at night, on weekends, kind of trying to clean everything up and make sure everything's running smoothly. And even when it wasn't the physical work that I was taking home, I would be consumed by just thoughts and some of the stress of the, what's happening with the team and all of that. So it definitely had me at this place where I was waking up during the mornings, dreading going into the office, and then even going in, I would feel really uh, frustrated and overwhelmed throughout the day and navigating all of these different things. And I'd go home at the end of the day, I would vent to my husband about all of the things, and then it would, come into going to sleep and losing sleep over some of these things that I was facing.
Yeah.
And I I had a lot of leadership training up to that point. My background is in business. I did management extension certificates. I had had so many leadership trainings with different employers over the years, and I was just like, none of this is working, right? Like I'm still not feeling
Yeah.
equipped, and like I have the tools to really thrive. So that was part of it. And then I had a couple of maternity leaves, and then it was COVID. So I took some time to really do that reflection on like, okay, where am I now? What are the things? Like a lot of people did at that time. And then when I came back, I had decided to do my executive coaching certification just to develop my own leadership skills, and have another kind of tool in the toolbox. And when I went through that coaching, again, not wanting to set out to start a business or anything like that, but it opened my eyes to the power of coaching. I had not had a lot of access to coaching, didn't really even know what it was about. There's a lot of talk about mentorship and things like that. Um, this really opened my eyes, and I was like, okay, that is exactly what I needed, and that would have been so helpful. And so I'm like, this is something that could be so impactful for other women that I know are going through these same things. And so there was the need and a lot of passion behind it, and that's really what started Repowered Leadership.
Wow, what an experience. And that's incredible. So in terms of I mean, it's very difficult to start a new role when there is no blueprint, there is no foundation, there is no lessons learned from previous times, or this is exactly what we have. Someone or some people will have a vision, and then let's create a role and see if we can figure it out. So that's difficult enough to do that, difficult enough, to start a new organization. And what I try and say to students that I'm working with a lot is nobody seems to enjoy being the new person. You just because you're so desperate to prove your worth when you get to an organization, especially in a position that you were in at that particular time. With the benefit of hindsight, Megan, is there anything that you would have done differently, knowing now what you know now and having lived through that experience?
Yeah, I think one for sure is just knowing that there are supports out there. You don't have to go through all of these things alone. And I think that is part of what we're building with Repowered Leadership and with the WOT community is that sharing of experiences and that support that you can feel that makes all of it, it's still challenging to go through, but it feels you can bounce back a bit quicker when you can hear from others who have gone through it before, or that just knowing that others have your back. Finding that would have been extremely impactful for me at that time for sure. And then I think it really does come down to building influence. This is something that was not really taught in any of the leadership trainings that I was taking. I would hear things like delegate to your team and empower others, and like all of that is great in theory, and it works well when everything's working well.
Yeah,
But when you're faced with those challenges, right, and there's nuances too for some of the things that women bring to these situations based on their lived experiences and things like that aren't quite those trainings aren't quite hitting the mark.
yeah,
And so yeah, finding other women that can understand that and some more practical tools that could actually apply and
yeah,
kind of working on my own self leadership, right?
yeah. I'm so glad you said that last part there. And one of the things that I've noticed with any new leader, not any, with most new leaders, gender agnostic to this point, is that if there are supports available to the leader, it's a lot of stuff that I would categorize as being on you, development supports that is, that you can learn how to have difficult conversations, you can learn consensus building, you can learn, communication to wider audiences, public speaking, like whatever it's needed for that particular role. And that those are a lot of tools that you can put in your leadership tool belt but it doesn't resonate or speak to you as the person, as the experience that you're going to live, how you're going to react to setbacks, how you're going to communicate in the moment, how you're going to, how you're going to set out and have people buy into a vision, how you're going to avoid driving home if you're commuting without having white knuckles because that person did that, this thing didn't work out the way that you were hoping, and such. So there's not a lot of stuff that's done for the inside. It's a lot of the kind of external facing facts and or parts. And that's where having that enlightened experience during your executive coaching. And I love the fact that you went into it just to find out more about it and gain some new skills. And then you come out with this epiphany saying, whoa, this is something that other people know about. Because in my experience with coaching, lots of people nowadays for sure are aware of it, but it doesn't necessarily translate into interest. They're kind of like, cool story, I'll just carry on because it's not really part of the traditional development path or development model for many organizations. Some organizations, of course, it is. So to bring all that together and really see and feel the experience, you're in such a brilliant position, I guess, all this to say, to be able to say, you don't need to have the experiences I had. Some of them you do, because it's part of growth, of course. But some of them you don't. You just don't. And I can help, through the WAT community or through the other trainings and teachings and learnings and one-on-one coaching that you can have, is to give yourself a better experience. Remove the distractions, and then start to really intentionally think about, how are you going to influence that role from the very beginning? How are you going to bring your full self? How are you going to actually create meaningful change? How are you going to grow and create growth within that role? So with that said, it's a perfect segue into the topic of influence. What does influence mean to and for you in terms of women in leadership positions?
Yeah, I think with something you just said too on the self, well, with, mentorship is one thing and having the guidance and really someone that's been there and done that can tell you, but again, bringing that own unique experience. And I had gone into that example that I shared earlier, that time in my career feeling like a very self-aware person. Like I did know, myself, and I had leadership experience and I had all of these things. So it's really, it still was the inner work though, and a lot of that self-leadership and understanding some of the patterns that I had, and a lot of the women that I work with now too are kind of conditioned with different gender bias, different lived experiences that we all have, but also just some of the barriers that we face and some of that internal narrative that gets in the way of moving forward or handling a situation most effectively in the way that leads to the most positive outcomes for everyone, so that women aren't burning out and
Yeah.
they're able to focus on the work that matters and the things that matter
Yeah.
most to them.
Yeah.
And so with influence, like there is, I find that everything comes down to influence. And again, as you mentioned in the introduction, I am a strategic advocate in the energy side. So I lead an industrial consumer advocacy group. And really the work there is to influence policy and regulatory decisions at the highest level. And so bringing those skills and strategies to really apply to these kind of situations that women are navigating as high performing, high achieving women in the workplace is essential. So it comes down to situations where you do need to influence decisions, maybe to resolve conflict or move a project forward, and just bring about positive change for yourself or your team or your organization. It's also advocating for yourself. So when it comes to negotiating raises, or we know that, there's still the gender pay gap and things like that. So bringing those influence and advocacy skills to the table is really important when going for a new role or ensuring that you're getting compensated fairly, or for just having the right resourcing, advocating for your team members, advocating for your organization, right? So these really important skills that can absolutely help women go from being overlooked, overworked, to being seen as that real strategic leader that is valued and seen for everything that she brings.
Yeah, and there's so much to that. It's not where you say in the morning, you kiss your spouse goodbye and they say, "Oh, what have you got on the agenda today?" I'm actually going to influence all day today. That's my whole day from 8:30 to 5. There's so much to that. There's the physical presence, there's the emotional, spiritual presence, there's the actual work that you're doing, there's the conversations that you're having or not having. There are the key areas that you're focusing on. There are the things that you're demonstrably caring about or dedicating or devoting time to, and maybe minimizing other things to create that influence where people who are observing are going to be saying, now this is interesting. Because we've
Mm-hmm.
probably both been in rooms where someone is talking about a particular thing and almost everyone else switches off because it wasn't part of the agenda, or it seems a little bit off topic. And the types and styles of people we are, especially in the coaching space, you're always leaning in to listen for more. That's interesting. Why is that an appropriate thing to be talking about or discussing right now? Mental note or physical note to think about that. So everything that
Mm-hmm.
you're doing,
Yeah, the active listening
yeah,
is part of it,
everything,
all of it.
everything that you're
Mm-hmm.
doing, the observation, the communication, the attention you're paying, the presence that you're actually genuinely providing in and of the moment, there's a lot to it. So how do you sit down with someone in the beginning without divulging any trade secrets, of course, and then say a key component part of your leadership will be influence, and influence comes in a variety of shapes and forms depending on what you're doing. How do you start that if the conversation has never really been about that before?
I think so. Women, there's a few key themes I think that come up too, and women, a lot of it is we are really good at doing, really good at executing, and this is it's actually not just women, right? Where when you're rising through the ranks of um, corporate, right, and
Yeah,
climbing the ladder, you come from that doer and you're really rewarded on the amazing work that you're doing and your skills and capabilities. And then continuing that into the leadership role that does require a little bit more of that influence where you do need to be influencing senior management to, resource your team or whatever that is. Um, but getting stuck in the weeds still, right? And feeling that responsibility to be taking everything on still, feeling like they don't want to let anybody down or burden others. Some of these things that do come up and I see it more so with women for sure that have this narrative that it comes down a bit to the double bind where men in leadership can be, if they're assertive, they're seen as strong leaders, and women that are assertive can be seen as difficult to work with, right? So there's just some of these internal things that are internalized and show up in how we lead and our starting point.
yeah,
So the influence, if you're feeling stuck in the weeds and you're wanting to be focused more on strategic work, like there's all the skills, there's all the capability, there's the ambition, there's all of those things. And it's just a few kind of strategies for protecting your time and energy and feeling okay with saying no to certain things. And it looks a little bit different for everybody, but again, it's having that communication, being able to do those difficult conversations, recognizing some of those internal patterns that show up.
yeah. So you mentioned some strategies there. I was going to try and get to the strategies of specifically, and I know that the influence is going to be different, so the strategy will be different depending on what it is you're actually trying to influence, whether it be a decision to be made or a conversation that has to be had or a strategic direction that's either to be pursued or not. But other key component strategies, I think in and of itself, the fact that you even have a conversation about influence in the first place to kind of say, oh yeah, so I'm in a position of influence now because I've worked with leaders and I'm sure you have, where I'll have to explain you have more influence now than you think you do, because they're kind of like, I'm just me, I'm the same person, and I see the drive and motivation to be that. You don't want to completely change persona or the personality at all. You still want to be true to yourself as you rise up the ladder if that's your path. but the expectations on you and the visibility that you have and the influence that you have is different. And it sometimes takes some convincing, Megan, when they're kind of like, what do you mean? And I'm saying every word you say is they're literally hanging on it. You are in your organization a mini celebrity. So you have followers, you have people who are looking to see what you're doing, you have people who maybe are not your biggest fan or supporter that are looking for a trip up to be able to say, told you, those sorts of things. But are there any kind of key strategies or facets out with the fact of just having that conversation in and of itself that you would recommend that women who are starting to think about leadership positions or the next stage or step for them that they should start to employ? Are there foundations or fundamentals to influence for you?
Yeah, inside what we go through, there's 5 pillars to building this influence and really stepping into that full strategic leadership role that opens up the doors and creates new opportunities so that women don't have to feel like they have to wait for that opportunity to come to them or that they need permission to take that next step. It's really creating their own opportunities and control of success and well-being in their careers. And so the 5 pillars that we go through include confident communication, and that really is knowing that there's this double bind or there's some pressures to, be assertive but not too assertive and hold your team accountable but don't upset anyone and different pressures. I think pressures that everyone faces, and maybe it's to a different extent for women and for different reasons. And so it's navigating that and being really, really intentional with communication
Right.
and in the rooms that you are communicating in, and which rooms you're putting yourself in or asking to be in, and a lot of that kind of clarity. And you mentioned too, it's doing all of this with taking in account your values or your own personal leadership style, and so that's a huge part of it as well. The strategic presence is something that we dig into really by looking at your own personal values. And burnout comes from overwork, yes. In many, many cases, I've seen it come more from that values misalignment. So you're in a company, this was my experience that I shared earlier. It's like really valuing growth and accountability and these kind of things and forward momentum, and being in a team that maybe didn't match that level or that value
Yeah.
leads to a lot of stress, and that can lead to burnout even more than just the sheer volume of work. So yeah, getting really clear on who you are, what you stand for, building up your own personal brand, and then being really intentional with your networking, getting comfortable with talking about your work. Oftentimes we don't want to brag, and I think this is again something that's more common for women, where humility is a great, an important leadership quality, and you still need to be talking about your work and getting the credit when credit is due,
Yeah.
in order to influence and to build up your own credibility,
Yeah.
where you are seen as someone that can step in for that new opportunity or take on that extra stretch role or whatever that is.
Yeah. And that influence, I love the influence in terms of trying to influence something to happen, and also the influence that you're creating for yourself, to say, by the way, just in case you weren't paying attention, I'm at the center of all of this. I'm the one that's quarterbacking it or pulling the strings, or whatever analogy you might want to use. How do you see that happening? Because a lot of times there's a propensity for human beings, not just women, but I've seen it a lot in women in the workplace as well, to minimize their efforts. And I think it's, I genuinely believe, actually, not I think, I genuinely believe it's coming from a good place, but it's not doing them a service in terms of the creativity and the passion, the drive, the work, the talent, the skill that they have actually put in to that. So how do you get that? Is that part of the confident communication where you start to literally say, by the way, these are the skills I bring to the table. This is what you can expect from me, and I will tell you about it when I deliver.
A lot of it is practice, and it's never perfect. Actually, have a funny story. Recently, I went out for lunch with a peer in the industry, and we had recently stepped into kind of similar roles. And throughout the lunch, he was sharing a lot of the successes that he's had personally and in business and all of these things. And I was kind of, I appreciate some self-deprecating humor and all of these things, bringing that into the conversation. I left being like, wow, he's doing. I'm like, no, he really over like what I learned later, maybe even exaggerating some of the accomplishments, right, that have happened. And I was diminishing what I was bringing to the table and just kind of downplaying it. And I teach on this stuff. So it's something that, yeah, it's deeply ingrained. And I think it really is as we build up and understanding other women sharing these experiences. And something that I try to do and share my accomplishments. And as women see other people doing that, taking credit where it's due, like showing up in being seen when that feels really uncomfortable and those kind of things.
Yeah.
It's certainly a journey, and it's really it's not like a one stop kind of this is all you have to do and then you are going to feel amazing just talking about your work and getting promoted. But it's first of all understanding what's happening, putting a label on it,
Yeah.
and then having that support and strategies to communicate more clearly, confidently, and productively, right? Where you can take the credit.
Yeah. And do you provide that vehicle within the community to be able to have that practice, to say, I'm going to be in this specific room, I want to be able to convey this type of message. Do I have an opportunity to say it out loud? Because sometimes the first time you say it out loud is literally the first time you've said it out loud, and you're in front of the audience at that point, and you're thinking, this doesn't even sound like me. This doesn't sound right. I normally wouldn't use these words. What am I doing? Oh, and then all of a sudden you're distracted and you're in your own head. Do you provide that kind of peer partnership, practice arena?
Yeah. A community, and it's an online, it's a lot, it's digitalized. A lot of women from not just Calgary but Edmonton and across Canada, where there is that ongoing kind of support. So if something comes up that they're navigating, they have a conversation, there's support not just from me but from others, right, that are
Yeah.
kind of going through this and building that network and relationship. And then having the structured calls, so every couple of weeks getting together as a group and really digging into some of the things that people are facing, and digging into what would be most helpful for them, right? So if it's role playing, then that can be a really valuable way of working through some of those challenges.
Yeah, I love that. It's just it's a thing that we just don't seem to do in general terms. Is think about what I want to say and practice it. I often say to people, there's the say it's a talk, for example. There's the talk that you plan, there's the talk that you do, and then there's the talk that you should have done every time. And you can substitute that for a meeting, you can substitute that for a job interview, you can substitute that for a pitch, anything like that. And the key is not to say, I'm going to get an opportunity to beat myself up afterwards about the things I didn't say or the fact I stumbled on a particular word or I blanked on an answer. It's just to say there's going to be continuous growth and continuous improvement in everything. So I'll plan it and do the very best I can. If I have an opportunity to role play, great. Sometimes you might not, because they'll say at 7:45 p.m. and you need to do this at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So you're kind of like, oh, okay, I'll do the very best I can. And as long as you do the very best you can, and then afterwards you have that reflection moment to be able to say, now that I know what I know and I've lived that experience, I would have paid more attention to that. I wouldn't have spent any time on that. I would have tried to embellish this a wee bit more, and those sorts of things. So I just love that ability to be able to say I don't know, or I just feel like I could do a better job. Would you mind giving me an opportunity to just to say it out loud and see how it feels, and then have that safe space, where someone can say, really good, can I offer up a suggestion? Yep, bring that part down so you can expand that part, or those sorts of things. There's just not enough of that, genuine people trying to support other people, having either lived that, or this is the type of style of support I would like when I'm in that position at some point in the future. It's such a tremendous investment of time and an ability to feel like you're influencing yourself by being okay asking for help.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting on a really key thing there that we have these fast-paced jobs, especially with the leaders that we work with, there's not a lot of extra time or space to be planning or reflecting or evaluating. So it really is important to be taking that intentional time to be strategic and thoughtful about how you're approaching a conversation. And maybe that is just on your own. Maybe it is bringing it to, a coach like yourself or a group like Watt to kind of brainstorm or go back and forth on what the best approach is. But really, one of the workshops that I do is mastering difficult conversations, and one of the resources it's so simple but so powerful is just a conversation planner where, like you're saying, those different steps, you just are intentional about, okay, what is it that I want to achieve? What are they bringing? What do they want to achieve?
Yeah.
And guiding clients through that can be really helpful. And then, ensuring that you're bringing empathy and really good clarity to each conversation. And then that reflection, like, what do you do differently next time? What are you celebrating too? What did you do great? And that's a big piece too.
Yeah, it definitely is. So, with that in mind, based on the lunch that you had recently, what would Megan do differently if you were to have that lunch over again and share similar experiences and stories?
Yeah, I love a good coaching question in the middle of the conversation. Absolutely. So I did the reflecting afterwards, and I would have owned the accomplishments and the successes. I have many, so having that open conversation um, and there's definitely it's not something, and it's important for advocacy and for credibility, right? When you're building these relationships, these are the kinds of meetings where people are taking into account your ability to perform at that next level or to work with them and achieve outcomes. Like, these are really important times that you don't want to shy away from sharing everything that you do bring to the table. So I think going into that meeting, maybe these are some things that could help. Like, what is my goal of the meeting? It was just a lunch, so I didn't really do that. But having some of that thoughtful thing kind of up front, and in a situation where someone is bringing all of that energy to the table, like how being thoughtful about how you probably not match it, but meet it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I'm not surprised at all that you did that reflection afterwards, and I'm sure it came quite quickly and swiftly, and the solutions to be able to get that organised next time
Yeah, and
is
then I share it with my clients, and it's a learning for everyone from there. So it's
yeah,
fun to be in it over here and to be, supporting others through it on the
yeah.
other side. So.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Everything is a work in progress. So, how can women in leadership positions today and or in the future, what would be your best advice or part of your program to be able to help them build the confidence and skills that's necessary for them to lead their teams effectively while still being true to themselves and not being affected by the burnout and such that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I think it is. Some of the strategies that we talked about with building influence, it comes down to similar strategies. And again, back to the know that you don't have to do it alone, and there are a lot of supports and resources out there. I think one of the, I guess maybe common, I don't know if mistakes is the right word, but patterns that I see is this focus of we're so busy, we need to get stuff done, and just like focusing on the deliverable that needs to go out or that deadline that needs to be met, and that's just one after the other. But taking that time to really thoughtfully approach that, whether it's a difficult conversation or maybe one that you're holding off on having that you need to be having,
Yeah,
taking that time to really do some of that reflection, either on your own or with the support, and then making time for connecting with others. I find so much of the opportunities that are created and just opening your eyes to possibilities or answers and solutions to things that you're solving comes from conversations through others. So if I were, there's a tight deadline here and an opportunity, like, yes, sometimes you need to pick that deadline, but if it happens all the time, like you want to start ensuring that you're making space for some of those opportunities for connection.
Yeah, and there's so much data. We're so surrounded by so much rich data with our experiences, with our patterns, with our successes, with our failures, with our bumps in the road, with our frustrations. Taking that reflection time to say, why does that annoy me so much? Or why do I always seem to be the one frantically trying to push at the end and everyone seems a bit more relaxed than I do? And and sometimes you don't have time or you don't make time to and you just brush it off and you kind of go, it's just who I am. Is it though? You know,
And I don't even know if everyone gets to that point because we're in the thick of it. And if I think about where I was, it was how could they be doing that? And how could, how could I be overlooked for this? And like, I think you're even one step ahead where it does come with a lot of that, like, okay, I should do some reflection and then the tools to do that. But it really does take that radical responsibility or accountability first, too, to be like, okay, I'm the only one that is going to put my well-being and my success and my career growth kind of front and center. So it really does stop with me.
yeah, it definitely does. It's so interesting. We're chatting about this today. In my journal this morning, I was talking about career advancement, career growth, and such, and the fact that over the years I've had many conversations with people, where I've said, maybe not as blunt as I'm going to say it now, but where I've said, like, what are you talking about? This is your career. This is not my career. My job is to help facilitate what you want or what you need, and or whatever you need to actually genuinely give you an opportunity to succeed in this role or thrive in this role. But your career is your career, just to be super clear. So if you're sitting waiting on me, to say, do you know what course you should take? Do you know what opportunities you should do? Do you know what circle you should join or anything like that? That's not the way it is. The advocacy for yourself has to start innately. The drive has to start within yourself because you're worth it, because you can contribute more than you're contributing right now, because you have an appetite for growth and greater influence with the expanded positions that you have going forward. So that ownership is really something that someone either has it or they have to develop it. But if they're not going to take it, then they hopefully will not be super surprised that they don't get the rewards that they are anticipating they should be getting.
And I think part of it's I think you and I probably work with the ones that do want to take that ownership, and it's really empowering to see how and the different ways that you can start to take back control and start to really step into that power and create the future that you're kind of striving for and the positive change that you're looking to get out.
Yeah, definitely. And creating a community or joining a community, being part of a community and having those conversations, like you said, it's just uplifting, it's energizing, it's inspiring, to say, wait a second, you mean I could do that? Of course you could do that.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I not doing that? That's a great question. Can I start doing that? Why not?
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
moving into that, that's
Yeah.
the shared, the community learning and growth is brilliant.
I think it's really important when we're talking about women in leadership too, because sometimes we can get wrapped in there is absolutely all these external barriers that women face in the workplace, and there's systemic bias and gender bias and societal norms and all of these things that do make it challenging. So it can be easy to be like, well, I was overlooked and like the system is broken. And yes, system needs to be changed,
Yeah.
but that's not going to happen overnight. So what are the things that we can do to help navigate in the system that we are in and really ensure that you're set up for success in the system that we will continue to try to change, and we're hopefully, we'll make progress there, but we don't want to wait for that. We want to empower you now.
Exactly. And that's exactly literally what you're doing right now with your Empowered Leadership and the various programs and services you offer. I love it. I love it. So, this is called the Best You interview series, and it gives me the opportunity to ask each of the guests what is one regular practice that Megan employs to give Megan the best opportunity to be the best version of yourself?
Yeah, I think one is learning to be kind to myself. And
Okay.
again, a work in progress for sure. This is something that is hard for high achievers and high performers and those that have some perfectionist tendencies and all of these things that that I certainly bring with me on my journey. And so it's easy to say, be kind to yourself, have self-compassion. One of the practices that I've done to help to foster that is to celebrate the wins. So big or small, at the end of every week, I am reflecting, I am taking that time to think about what are the things that I'm proud of that I've accomplished that are kind of moving me in the direction that I'm going, because otherwise it's that internal chatter that just will say you're not far enough along, or you should be further ahead, or you should be doing more. So that's one practice that I instill that is really important to my mental health and personal and professional growth.
I love it. Question: do you literally write it down, type it out, or is it something you just you ruminate on just internally?
Yeah, journal it.
Yeah, yeah. Because one thing I've done with a number of clients is when you get to that negative self-talk perspective, if you can, if it's safe to do so, write down literally what you're saying to yourself, and then consider if you would say that to someone that you love, someone that you admire, someone that you support, someone that you care for, someone that you genuinely hope the best for. And the answer 100% of the time is no, is no.
Yeah.
Of course I wouldn't, but the power is in the actual literal writing it out in whatever way that you do that, to be able to look and go, that actually is pretty good.
Yeah.
That's as good as I could do this week, and I'm happy with that.
And one of the I don't know if you've read The Gap and the Gain, Dan Sullivan, and okay, it's one that's helped me on this self-compassion journey too, and celebrating the small and the big wins. Um, and it is kind of the perspective. So you wouldn't say it to a friend or a family member, but you also probably wouldn't say it to yourself if you're measuring in the right way. So you don't want to measure, you want to know where you're going and like have that destination in mind, but then measure your performance and your progress by looking backwards, not the gap that's ahead of you, but by the gain that you've had. And then you will just, it's not because you should be kind to yourself. It's like, wow, okay, we're actually making some progress here.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And reframing sometimes what progress means. I thought it meant this in the planning stage, but in the actual execution stage, it came to fruition that it was slightly different. And that's okay, because a
Mm-hmm.
plan is just a plan, and the execution is the actual reality that you're dealing with. For some reason, Megan, what's coming up for me here is the way that my dad used to talk about golf. When he was a very keen golfer when he was a younger guy, and he would come home, and every day he would come home and he would talk me through his entire round, and I would be saying, I don't have time to sit here for all this amount of time. But what he would do is he would focus on the bad shots. So he would hit, and say for example, an 80 or an 85 or something like that, and then he would pay particular attention to those three bad shots that he had on the 7th, the 11th, and the 14th or something, and that would become the narrative of the round. And today, I don't know if you're a golfer, or if anyone listening has got any keen interest in golf, but if you listen to the top golfers today, when they're interviewed straight after they've come off the course, when you're still in that heightened athletic, competitive state, they're always talking about, I got the best I could out of the round. Yeah, didn't hit that one exactly, but that happens in a round of golf. A round of golf is a long experience, and they've done a fabulous job of minimizing the things that didn't go well and talking up the things that do go well. Now, that's not to say that they might not ruminate, throw their bag around when they get to the locker room when the cameras aren't there, but they've done a masterful job of that, of just saying, yeah, bad stuff happens. It's a sport. Bad stuff happens in the workplace because you don't get to control absolutely everything that's happening there. Why not concentrate on what went well and not ignore the bad stuff, of course, but learn in equal amounts from both without overdoing both.
Yeah, I think that is how we're wired. But focusing in on the bad is the default for myself, for a lot of the high achievers that I work with, for your dad, it sounds like. And so you do need to be really intentional, right, about pulling out your own successes and refocusing on having that more positive and productive mindset that will just, I'm sure it helps. Those are the top golfers, right? So it actually helps your performance in the long run.
Yeah, and I think it's probably intentional through literally every single shot, every single endeavor that we're doing. It does that intention to say, that wasn't very good. I wish that hadn't happened, but it did. So this is what I'm going to do next, and this is what I'm going to do next. So you're kind of dissecting it and processing it throughout the day, throughout the meeting, throughout the workshop, throughout the class, throughout the session. You get that opportunity, and it probably, as I say this out loud now, creates a little bit more intentional mindfulness in and of the moment, rather than saying, I don't want to think about this right now. I'll deal with this at some point later if I'm asked, or if I have the time to sit down, which I probably won't make the time to sit there and think
Yeah.
about this.
And I think as long as it's not an excuse, like I still need to reflect on this, so I'm not going to do that next action until I
Yeah,
make this time, because that is something that's come up in some of our workshops. Like you're planning and you're being intentional about going into a conversation. At what point does it become perfectionism or over preparing? And so it is, yeah, you do want to be intentional and taking action when it makes sense.
yeah, definitely, definitely. I love it. Before I let you go, Megan, where can people find out more about you and more about Empowered Leadership?
So repoweredleadership.com, and then I'm on Repowered Leadership's on Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn as well under my Megan Gill and Repowered Leadership. And yeah, would love to connect with your listeners. Feel free to reach out.
Fabulous. Excellent. I knew this was going to be a great conversation. I absolutely loved all of it. I'm sure that we could do this again and go deeper and deeper and deeper. I can't thank you enough for your time, Megan. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Thank you so much for having me on. Appreciate it.